One of the things that is very noteworthy about the story of Yosef is the idea of dreams. Dreams play a very, very important role. There really are three sets of dreams that figure prominently in the story. There are Yosef's own dreams, the dream of the sheaves bowing to him, the dream of the sun and the moon and the stars bowing to him. That's the dreams of Yosef, which relate to the idea that he would be superior to his brothers. We have the dreams of the Sar HaMashkim and the Sar HaOfim, the wine steward and the baker. And these are the dreams which secure Yosef's release from prison. The dream that the Sar HaMashkim would be restored to his post, and the dream that the Sar HaOfim would be hanged for his crimes. And then, of course, we have the two dreams of Paro, which, of course, foretell the years of plenty and the years of famine. And Yosef interprets those dreams and becomes the manager of the food program of Egypt, and thus rises to becoming the viceroy, the second in command of the entire country. So dreams are very, very prominent. It's very interesting that until Yosef, God communicates to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov with direct speech. When God has something He wants to tell them, He tells them. And already we see a diminution. Yosef is not a Navi in the conventional sense. God does not speak to him. But God sends messages to him through His own dreams, through the dreams of others. It's very, very interesting. What really is the difference? Why did the Avos receive this type of direct nevuah, and in Yosef's case it becomes a dream? Let's put that question on the back burner. And let's talk about something else, about the Chanukah story. And this is one of those things that, you think about it, it really is surprising. Because when we think of the Chanukah story, we think of a tremendous victory, that the Yevanim were not able to achieve what they wanted to achieve. They wanted to infiltrate Eretz Yisrael and Jewish culture, and they were repelled. I mean, that's how we understand the story. In certain ways it's true. The temple was taken back, it was cleansed, it was rededicated. But we know from the Al-Anisim prayer that one of the things that Yavon wanted to accomplish was L'hashkicham Torasecha. They wanted to cause us to forget our Torah. And in a very significant way, they were successful. Because we know historically that just about this time, shortly after the Chanukah story, something occurs in the history of Torah which is indicative of a forgetting of Torah. This is the beginning of machlokas, the beginning of dispute. It takes place shortly after the Greek period. And what does that mean? That means that until the time of the Chanukah story, there was a perfect chain of Masorah. Torah was recalled and transmitted accurately. And just about this time, there seems to be a break in that chain of tradition. Things are forgotten, clarity is lost, and now Torah has to be reconstructed from the evidence. And when it comes to that process of reconstruction, everyone's mind works differently, and therefore this person working on the evidence comes to this conclusion. That person working on the evidence comes to a different conclusion. And that's where you have machlokas, that's where you have dispute. And the explosion of dispute begins just at the time of the Chanukah story, historically. We have the first machlokas, the first recorded machlokas, which pertains to smicha, the laying of the hands on the head of a sacrifice, whether that's permitted on Shabbos, on Yom Tov. That was the first machlokas, but not the last machlokas. After that, there were hundreds and hundreds of instances where the sages argued, debated. And that means that something obviously was forgotten. Rav Hutner Zecher Tzadik Livracha, whose yard site, I believe, was today, as a matter of fact, points out a very interesting thing. When we talk about Torah, there really is a dual nature to Torah. There is Torah as it exists in God's mind. And there is the Torah which is binding upon us. The Torah that we are obligated to observe and follow and practice. And the two don't necessarily coincide. They don't necessarily go hand in hand. Because the Torah tells us a very, very interesting thing. The Torah says that Jewish law is decided by the Beis Din Hagadol. It's decided by the Sanhedrin. And the Torah says, Al pi haTorah asher yarucha, that we should practice in accordance with the law as they define it. Lo sasur min hadavar asher yagidu lecha yamin u'shmol. You should not swerve, not to the right, not to the left, from the instructions of the Beis Din Hagadol. And we have in the Gemara stories which bring out the following idea, that there were instances where there was a sign from heaven, or perhaps even a heavenly voice, in which God expressed his opinion, and God himself was overruled by the majority of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin took a position, and they said that based on our understanding of the text, and our understanding of the context, and using the methods of interpretation, we come to such and such conclusion. So it makes no difference what God says. God says, no, I meant something else. It's irrelevant. Our interpretation of the Torah leads us to this conclusion. Lo b'shamayim hi, the Torah is no longer in heaven. It's ours to interpret. And therefore the normative halacha follows the ruling of the Beis Din Hagadol, not God. But obviously, the Beis Din Hagadol is trying to figure out what God meant. They're not deliberately coming to defy God. But the halacha is in accordance with their understanding of the text. Not in accordance with God's will as revealed through prophecy or a heavenly voice or a miracle. Now this is very curious, but it points to this idea that there really are two aspects to Torah. There's the Torah as exists in God's mind, the Torah that was primordial, the Torah that existed, as the Talmud says, 974 generations before man was created. The original Torah. That's God's Torah. Our Torah is the Torah as developed, as expounded by the earthly court. And the footnote says that it's very interesting that on the one hand, the decrees of the Yevonim brought about a forgetting of the primordial Torah. Whereas even that Torah, which was revealed at Mount Sinai, began to slip away because of the oppressive decrees of the Yevonim. They banned the study of Torah, they banned the teaching of Torah. So as a result, there was a loss. There was a loss. A lot was forgotten. A lot couldn't be preserved. But on the other hand, that loss led to a increase in creative study of Torah. Now, the attempt to reconstruct, to restore that which was forgotten, led to an explosion of scholarship. The consequence of that, of course, was the literature that we study until this very day. The Mishnah, the Gemara, later, all the commentators, the codes, and so on and so forth, are all a consequence of this forgetting of Torah. So in a sense, God's Torah, the Torah as it originally existed in the mind of God, has waned, has become diminished. The Torah as it is created, so to speak, through man's efforts at understanding and delving into the text, has blossomed, has flourished, has expanded. I saw in a sefer once that this may be related to the very curious dispute between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai when it comes to Ner Chanukah. As we know, our practice is we light one candle the first day, 2 candles the second day, 3 candles the third day, and it is most of the holech. We add. But that's only the opinion of Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says the opposite. Beis Shammai holds poches v'holech. The first night you begin 8, and then you go down to 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's a very curious debate. Do we go up? Do we go down? And there are many interpretations. But I once saw in the sefer that it relates to this idea. That what really is the consequence of the Chanukah story? Is the consequence of the Chanukah story a diminution? Or is the consequence of the Chanukah story an expansion? So it depends how you look at it. Both are true. On the one hand, there was a shikchas HaTorah, there was a forgetting of Torah, which was caused by the oppressive exeris of the Yevanim, exactly as they planned. So therefore, the pristine, primordial Torah, as it once existed, was to a great extent lost. We don't have an accurate recollection of the Torah exactly as it was given from our Sinai, meaning the oral tradition. The text, of course, we have. But in terms of what followed of necessity, which is that the sages would apply themselves and delve deeply to figure out what, therefore, should the halacha be, and this led to an explosion of Torah scholarship and Torah learning. So, in that sense, it's most of the halach. There's an expansion, there's a development, there's a growth. Question?
How does the decrease of degrees cause the diminution of the primordial Torah? You would think that they would cease learning. They would, so you're saying that the learning increased.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There was a break. There was an interruption. Okay? Now what happens when there's an interruption? So you forget the body of received knowledge is lost. Not everything was lost, but a lot was lost. Okay, now the Yevanim have been defeated. But the fact they've been defeated doesn't mean that they haven't accomplished their objective. Or they wanted the Torah to be forgotten, they were successful in bringing that about. But once something is forgotten, it's very hard to restore it. So how do you try to restore it? You do detective work. See, this is something that maybe those who are not students of Talmud can't fully appreciate. Let me try to explain this a little bit better. Because when you study Talmud or Jewish law, you're trying to clarify a point of law. Very often, there's no place to which you can turn that will tell you that this is the law, black and white, as it was given by God to Moshe Rabbeinu on Har Sinai. You're really trying to reconstruct something. You're bringing evidence. You bring evidence from a piece of Talmud in that place, and from a comment of the Rambam in this place, and from a comment of Rabbi Akiva Eger in this place. And you're trying to discover a pattern and reconstruct what must have been assumed in earlier generations. Now the Gemara tells us this happened on other occasions. The Talmud says in Maseches Temurah that when Moshe Rabbeinu died, there were 3,000 halachas that were forgotten, and Osniel ben Kenaz restored them using pilpul, using Talmudic analysis. But it's a reconstruction on the basis of evidence. In other words, the thing which is most analogous would be the following. Let's say you have a crime scene. And the question is, who done it? Who committed the murder? Somebody knows. Who knows? There's one person who knows. The murderer himself. Right? So, to him it's not a secret. But what do the police have to do? They have to gather the evidence. You know, there may be a hair over here, or a drop of blood over there, or a footprint, or perhaps a overheard conversation of two people talking. And painstakingly, by analyzing these little bits of evidence, you somehow build a case, and you identify the criminal, and then the police put the man under arrest, and he confesses. And he says, yeah, you got me, I did it. Right? And the point is that there are two things that are going on. There is the knowledge of the crime as it exists within the mind of the criminal, and there is the knowledge which is reconstructed by the detectives. That's really the reality of the Talmud studies, really the same thing. I mean, there's somebody who knows this, or someone who knew this. Moshe Rabbeinu knew it. Right? God revealed the entire Torah Shabbat to Moshe Rabbeinu. But in this process of forgetting, so now there's a need to reconstruct it on the basis of evidence. And you really have to make a case. So on the one hand, yes, there is a diminution of the Torah, of the clarity of Torah as it existed in the mind of Ribono Shel Olam and in the mind of Moshe Rabbeinu, to whom it was given. On the other hand, you have this tremendous explosion of Torah. Now the interesting thing is that blossoming of Torah, did it come to the right conclusion or not? Maybe yes, maybe no. But it's not relevant whether it came to the right conclusion, because that's the idea of Lo B'Shemayim. The Torah is no longer in heaven. The halacha, the binding practice, is in accordance with the ruling of the Beis Din HaGadol, even if it got it wrong, as long as it was sincere in its efforts to try to arrive at the truth.
Were there great scholars that we know of that existed prior to the Hanukkah story?
Now that's the interesting thing, that before the time of the Chanukah story, as we know, there were great scholars. Now, the Rambam tells us the chain of Masorah, going back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe was a great scholar, Yeshua was a great scholar, Pinchas was a great scholar, and so on and so forth. But there's nothing recorded of their teachings, because when the Beis Din HaGadol gave its verdict, it was a binding verdict, binding precedent, and there's no need to record the names of the people who disputed the point previously. We have record of machlokes only when the institution of the Beis Din HaGadol lapses, and therefore the machlokes remains unresolved. So this is a fantastic thing when we think about it. The Chanukah story, it's not all well that ends well. Yeah, the temple was taken back, and the temple was cleansed, and the temple was restored, and Jews could be circumcised and keep kosher and observe the mitzvahs. And that's true. In that sense, it's certainly a victory we're celebrating. But there were losses. There were losses in the Chanukah story. But the losses, in a sense, led to something which is fantastic and grand. And I would even speculate that it is really that type of learning, the need to engage in that type of analysis and study and painstaking research, that really, in a sense, preserved the Torah and made it so attractive and so beloved to its students. You know, it's one thing just to memorize a list of directives by rote, and there's something else to be engaged in a process which facilitates your own creativity, where there's a sense of accomplishment, because there's a personal element which is injected. There's a big difference. And I think that to a certain extent, Torah before the story of Chanukah was really, memorizing a bunch of rules. There was clarity, but there was really little room for ingenuity, for creativity. Because once there's already the shikha Torah, there's the forgetting of Torah, the restoration really requires very, very bold intellectual endeavor. And it's that which becomes interesting and intriguing and fascinating and draws a person into it. And, it really is the type of study that really allowed for generations and generations of students to become engaged in Torah study and fall in love with it. So, what if is always a very funny game to play. Like, what if the Chanukah story would not have happened? How would the world be different? But we probably should assume that since God does run the world, what was meant to happen happened. And therefore that Shikha Satorah that led to this transformation probably is also part of the divine plan.
Did it ever happen again in history?
Does it ever happen again? I'll tell you the truth. That I think if you study the history of Torah study, is you find that every few hundred years there's a revolution of sorts. And a new methodology, a new approach, to use a word that borders in the pseudo-intellectual, a new paradigm, a new way of thinking about Torah. And the consequence of that is that there's new life injected into the community of scholars. But I think in our own time, not so long ago, you talk about Rabbi Brisker and the revolution that he introduced in the study of Talmud. You're talking about a total transformation, a revolution. And now I wouldn't venture to say that it's as great as the revolution which occurred at the time of the Chanukah story with the introduction of unresolved dispute. But I think it's a revolution nevertheless. And when we have a little more distance, God will recognize it as such. But what really happens over here is that the efforts of the Greeks result in a Torah which becomes the vehicle for our own creativity and our own ingenuity, which it wasn't previously. And to me what that means is that there's a correction, if you will, that is introduced into Jewish life which fortifies us against the advances of Yavon. In other words, Yavon, Greece, is introducing a culture which allows for creativity, art, science, theater, music, politics. In other words, a much more active role for human beings in shaping their society. And more humanistic. Because we are not merely battered around by the impersonal forces of nature, by the gods, if you will. Whereas we can begin to shape our own lives, our own society, our own experience. I mean, this is what really Greece is introducing. And that would have been very attractive to a society which is living by rules that have been passed down for hundreds of years, that guide us in lockstep. This is what you have to do, and this is what you have to do, and this is what you have to do. I mean, I hate to bring this as a source, but this is what the Fiddler on the Roof is all about. Tevye lives in a world which is governed by tradition. In other words, where the age-old tradition tells you what you do first thing in the morning, and what you do after that, and what you do after that, what you do after that, what you do after that. Things are unchanging, things are constant. Why do we do things the way we do them? Not because we understand them, or not because we've made a rational decision to live this way. We do it because tradition. That's what it is. And then you have the Haskalah, you have the Eastern European Enlightenment, which is to some a breath of fresh air, to others a breath of cold air, and it infiltrates. And now there are new values, and romance, socialism. And the old system is breaking down because these new ways of thinking, these new ways of living, are very, very attractive to people in the traditional community. And of course, Fiddler on the Roof doesn't have a happy ending. But what you'd want to see is that somehow the challenge of those alien forces creates or brings about a correction or a transformation within Judaism which fortifies us in being able to resist that. And that's really what happens over here. What happens is that the shikchas HaTorah, the forgetting of the Torah, leads to a new form of Torah study, which is intellectually rigorous, intellectually satisfying, intellectually challenging, right? Which is an opportunity for us to express our creativity and our ingenuity and create a life which really can rival the humanist culture of the Greeks, the Hellenists. So, in a sense, the Hellenists shoot themselves in the foot. They bring about changes within the nature of Jewish life which immunize us to their advances. And that's really the resolution of the Chanukah story, which is a fantastic thing when you think about it. And, if you fast forward, this was said, that the Reb Chaim Brisker, when he introduced his method, the Brisker method of Talmudic analysis, was essentially what he was doing was fortifying the yeshiva community from the negative influence of the Eastern European Enlightenment. In other words, he was giving a methodology that made Talmudic study vigorous and intellectually stimulating, so that people would not be drawn into a secular culture, which is essentially a one-way path out of Judaism. So this is a little bit about Chanukah. Chanukah really is the transformation of the culture of Jewish learning from to use a term that a certain secular scholar used, a mimetic culture, a culture of imitation, right, to a culture of intellectual creativity. That's really the transformation which took place. And to a certain extent, that really is the difference between the way in which God communicates to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and the way God communicates with Yosef. That's really the difference between Nevuah and the dream, and the Chalom. Now this is something that we're not going to have enough time to develop fully, but there's a statement in the Talmud, a very curious statement, which says, Kol ha-chalomos holchin achar hapeh. Dreams follow their interpretation. Dreams follow their interpretation. Meaning, there is no correct interpretation to a dream. The dream gives you a set of options. But which one will be realized is up to you. Let's understand that. Because we know that situations give you options. Correct? Let's say, for example, you're here in Toronto, and you receive 2 invitations in the mail for simchas on the same day. There's a wedding in New York on such and such day. There's a wedding in Los Angeles on such and such day. So you have 3 options. To go to neither, to go to one, or to go to the other. Can't go to both. But the situation creates options. And undoubtedly you'll choose one of the 3. I mean, there's no fourth alternative. Either you're not going to go, you'll go to the one, you'll go to the other. If your mail would not have arrived that day, you'd be unaware of the options. In other words, you have no simcha to go to, so the only option is to stay home. You're not invited anywhere. So the mail informs you of options that you have. And options you never would have known, never would have thought of, never would have dreamt of. That's what the male brings to you. Dreams are the same way. Whereas dreams bring you options. Now, it may be they expand your options, and maybe they narrow your options. It could be either or. Or it may be that before the dream you had an infinite number of choices. Now the dream tells you no, that your range of options is somewhat limited. Maybe the dream expands your options. It introduces you to opportunities that you wouldn't have been aware of. But the dream is not something which is rigid. It's not something which is, this is the way it is. It introduces a range of options. Which option is realized? The one that you give it. The Talmud tells an amazing story about Abaye and Rava who went to the same dream interpreter. One of them paid, the other didn't pay. And they both had the same dreams. So the one that paid got a good interpretation. The one that didn't pay got a bad interpretation. And all interpretations came true. Because the dreams follow their interpretation. And in the past, we explained that this may be really what is going on in the story of Yosef. And again, time doesn't allow us to develop it fully, but let's explore the story a little bit. Yosef has these dreams in which it's clear that he is meant to be his brother's superior. In the first dream, they're bundling grain, and all the brothers' sheaves bow down to his sheaf. In the second dream, the sun, the moon, 11 stars bow to Yosef himself. So it's clear Yosef is campaigning, in a way, for a superior position. The brothers understand it, that Yosef thinks he's going to be the king. He's going to be the king. Now, it's an interesting thing. We know that ultimately there was a king. Malchus was vested with the tribe of Yehuda. But apparently, Yosef had a different idea, that he should be the melech. And the brothers were very resistant to this. And the brothers held that this was such a dangerous proposal that Yosef had to be neutralized, even if it meant selling him into slavery. What the justification for that is a topic we have to explore another time. How did the dreams ultimately come true? Was Yosef the king of the Jews within the structure of the Jewish people? No. Was Yosef became the king of Egypt, where the brothers were exiled to, and therefore in that sense Yosef became their superior. Now, is that what the dreams meant all along? For example, it says in the pasuk that when Yaakov heard the dreams, it says Aviv Shamar Asadavar. Yaakov was guarding the situation. Rashi says that Yaakov was anticipating, he was awaiting, he was hoping that it would come true. In other words, to get the brothers off his back, Yaakov scolded Yosef as if he was on the brother's side. But in reality, he was waiting, he was hoping and praying that it should come true. In what sense? And what did Yaakov think the meaning of the dreams was? He was hoping that someday my son should be the viceroy of Egypt. I wouldn't call that Yiddish nachas. I mean, what would you do if one of your kids would say that my dream is to become the Prime Minister of Canada, or the President of the United States? You can't think of anything better than that. I mean, that's what you want to do with your life. And we wouldn't consider that something desirable. So Yaakov undoubtedly understood the dream differently. He understood the dream that within the structure of Klal Yisrael, Yosef would have the superior position. And that's what he was hoping for. And in fact, the dreams didn't come true as Yaakov hoped. They came true in a very different way. Now, again, we don't have time to discuss this, but undoubtedly it's not just a question of who is going to be the king. Obviously, Yosef stands for certain values, and Yehuda may stand for different values. And the question is whose vision is going to win. But it's not like a political campaign. In many political campaigns, it seems that it's all about the personality of the candidate. It's not his positions. The positions are very flexible. It's really all about me. I want to be the person who's holding office. But over here, we're not dealing with a question of simply who will be the king. There are different visions, different ideas, different positions as to what the nature of leadership within Klal Yisrael should be. Yosef had one vision, you had a different vision, and this is the competition. Whose vision is going to win? And the dreams don't come true as Yaakov thought they would come true. They came true very differently. Now, why did they come true differently? So let me share with you what I think is a very simple thought. In next week's parsha, we're going to read that after the 7 years of plenty, the famine begins, and there's no food to be had anywhere. The brothers come to Egypt to buy food. And they are brought into Yosef's presence, and it says that Yosef recognized them, they didn't recognize him. And it says that Yosef remembered the dreams. He remembered the dreams. He remembered the dreams. And he says that basically you're going to have to prove that you're not spies by bringing your younger brother to Egypt. So the question was, what if Yosef remembered the dreams? Rashi says that he remembered the dreams and understood that this was their fulfillment. When the brothers bowed down to him, the dreams were coming true. The Ramban says the opposite. Because the dreams didn't come true, because the dreams were that 11 brothers would bow down to him, but only 10 came. Binyamin stayed behind. So Yosef understood that this is not the fulfillment of the dream, and he has to bring about the fulfillment of the dream. So he has to scheme to get Binyamin to come down to Egypt so that all 11 brothers would bow down to him. So that's what the Ramban understands, that Yosef understood the dream wasn't yet fulfilled, and therefore he had to plot to bring about its fulfillment. Some Sofer asks in the Ramban that where does it say anywhere that there's an obligation or a chiyuv or a mitzvah to make your dreams come true? I mean, he's putting them through the ringer. Now the accusation, they're spies, they have to prove themselves, bring Binyamin. For what? To bring about that the dream comes true? You have a dream. So the dream obligates you to bring about its fulfillment? Seems a little strange. Now, I think the interpretation is as follows. Yosef had a long time, and many years, to think about what had happened. And Yosef came to a very reasonable conclusion that if the dream will come true in the way that everyone thought, that within Klal Yisrael, Yosef will have that position of centrality, that will bring about a schism in Klal Yisrael that will tear the nation apart. I think that's a very reasonable conclusion. In other words, Yosef saw that he informed the brothers, he aroused their jealousy, their hatred, they plotted against him, they sold him as a slave, they almost killed him. In other words, Yosef understood that this is not going to fly. This is not going to be accepted. But there's a dream, and the dream foretells that it will happen. So there's only one solution. By giving the dream a different interpretation, in as much as all dreams follow their interpretation, by giving it this interpretation, that will preclude the possibility of it receiving a different interpretation. And that's exactly what he did. It was Yosef schemed to bring about that the dream should be fulfilled by their serving him, not as the Melech Yisrael, but as the Viceroy of Egypt, because this way that would be the fulfillment of the dream, and the unity of Klal Yisrael would be preserved. He wouldn't become a divisive figure in the structure of Klal Yisrael. But this is the idea, that dreams are given their meaning, as opposed to Nevuah. Nevuah has its meaning. A Nevuah, a genuine prophecy, means what it means. Maybe we don't always understand what it means, but whatever it means, that's what it means. A dream, we give meaning to. And therefore, what really happens over here, the real difference between Yosef on the one hand and Yaakov is, because Yaakov receives messages from Ribono Shel Olam, and he's told to go, to do, and he does. He follows instructions. He goes from the house of Lavan, he goes back to Eretz Yisrael, he goes from Eretz Yisrael, he goes to Egypt. God tells him what to do and he does. Yosef shapes his own life. Yosef interprets dreams with creativity, with understanding. He shapes events. He isn't merely directed. He actively charts his own biography. That is the connection to the Chanukah story. Whereas what changes in Chanukah is in the way in which God communicates with us. That until Chanukah, we are directed. After Chanukah, we are creative. Because we give our interpretation to Torah, and it is that interpretation which is keveya, the halach, the normative halach. And if it exactly parallels the transformation which takes place in this step from Yaakov to Yosef. Yaakov is directed by God. Yosef is given the dream which he interprets creatively. And therefore that may be a parallel between these stories that we're reading in the Chumash and the story of Chanukah. And this is a difference. This is not a minor difference. It's a very, very, very big jump from being ordered to being given the opportunity to creatively chart your own way. Now, obviously, and I think this is the disclaimer we have to make, that this can be taken too far. You know, Immanuel Kant said that the hallmark of a human being as a rational being is moral autonomy, when he makes his own decisions. And the Kantian philosophy was adopted by the Reform movement. You know, the Reform movement is essentially Kantian, and they believe that every person makes moral judgments for himself. You might wish to make it keeping the Bible in mind. It could be an inspiration, it could be a source of guidance, but ultimately you chart your own life. That's how we don't go. Because we're not saying that every person literally, starting from scratch, charts the direction of his own life. We're talking in a more narrow sense, in the interpretation of Torah, decides, just like Yosef did not chart his own path. Yosef didn't wake up one morning and say, I want to be king, or I want to be viceroy of Egypt. There is a dream. The dream provides options, and within the options that the dream provides, he chooses his way. And that's what a Jew has to do. The Jew has a Torah. It may be, yes, that we delve into the Torah, we interpret the Torah, we examine the Torah, but ultimately, although we use our creativity and our own insight, but it's really only to understand that which is in front of us, not to chart new independent pathways. But there is, I think, a very close parallel between what happens in the Chanukah story and what happens in these parashas. Next question.
When Moshe died, it was very specific. There were 3,000 halachas that were forgotten. and then they were reestablished. Do we have an understanding of what was not forgotten? That is to say, there should be a body of law that doesn't have machloket about it, because it was remembered that it was not, or do we assume everything was forgotten and rebuilt?
No, the vast majority of things were in fact, not forgotten. In other words, it's a little bit skewed, because obviously the Talmud is going to give much more space to those issues that are disputed than those issues that are not disputed. A non-disputed law can be put down in 2 lines. Right? A disputed law can be discussed for 20 pages.
Right.
Right? So anyone studying Talmud will think, everything is disputed. It's not true. This is that the Talmud obviously devotes more space to the disputes than it does to the things that are not disputed. Now, I'll tell you a fantastic story, just if you're interested in, along these lines. There was a story like this, that the Reb Chaim Brisker had a Talmud, had a disciple, who was the Rav in a city called Kharkov. He was the Kharkov Rav. And the Kharkov Rav and the Chavetz Chaim once came to visit Reb Chaim Brisker. A rabbinic visit. So they were sitting together, and as they were sitting together, someone came in to ask a question of Reb Chaim Brisker, who was in Brisk, in his town. So a person came in and said, Rebbe, says, why is it that most of the questions in the Talmud are unresolved? And if you go through the entire Talmud, you'll see that most of the questions are unresolved. Why is that? So Reb Chaim Brisker said, it's not true. He says, if you go through the Talmud, most of the questions are resolved. That was the whole conversation. Anyway, the visit ended, and the Chavetz Chaim and the Kharkov Rav were taking the train back to Radin. Actually, it didn't stop in Radin, it stopped in Lida, but from there you had to go by wagon, but they were on their way back to Radin. Now the Chavetz Chaim, people don't realize, the Chavetz Chaim was renowned for guarding his tongue. But the truth was, people think he didn't talk. It was the opposite. He was a very gregarious person. He always was talking. Very talkative person, the Chavetz Chaim. Some say the reason was he didn't want anyone else to get a word in edgewise, because they would say some Lashon Hara. If you dominate the conversation, it would be safe. But as a rule, if you would travel with him on the train, he would converse for hours. But on this trip back to the Chavetz Chaim was just thinking. The whole way he wasn't talking, just thinking. Okay. And finally they got to the station. It was a few hours train ride, and Chavetz Chaim turns to the Kharkov Rav and says, "Your Rebbe Reb Chaim is a genius." You know what happened? You realize what happened? Reb Chaim Brisker said that if you go through the entire Talmud, you'll see that most of the questions are resolved. The Chavetz Chaim asked him, is that true? If you go through the entire Talmud, are most of the questions resolved? So what the Chavetz Chaim did was, in that train ride, he went through the entire Talmud in his head. Right? Those 3 hours, he went through the entire Talmud, and he realized that it's correct, it's true, that most of the questions are resolved. So now it took him 3 hours to figure that out, because he went through the entire Talmud. And Reb Chaim was able to answer that on the spot. So after the 3 hours, he said, "Your Rebbe Reb Chaim is a genius." An amazing story. But I think that's the truth. That most things aren't disputed.
Give an example.
That a mezuzah, right, has the parsha of Shema and volume Shemaya in it, and not Bereshis, and not V'zos HaBracha, and not Hazinu, and not Oz Yosher. Right? That's a dispute. Everyone knows that. In other words, there are thousands and thousands of halachas. Yes, so there are disputes on mezuzah, right? There's no dispute by the way that you put it on the right side, not the left side. But there's a dispute in this unusual circumstance, if you put it on the right side going this way, and the right side going this way, that there could be disputes. But on the general basic principles, there's no dispute.